Welcome to The Smart Divorce on Divorce Source Radio, helping you move forward with focus, hope, and confidence, saving you time, money, and your sanity as you build a better life post-divorce. I'm Steve Peck. Deborah Moskovich, divorce consultant, educator, and author of The Smart Divorce, brings you the leading experts and researchers in the divorce arena. We'll also be speaking with those in the trenches, people who've learned from their divorce and how their experience has changed their lives. And they would tell you for the better. Deborah's learned that divorce can be a beginning, even if it looks like an end. Divorce can be rich in opportunity to learn and grow from. And we're going to explore how to take this information and create a positive post-divorce life. And now, here's Deborah.
Hi, Steve. How are you today?
Well, I'm feeling good today.
Well, I'm glad you're good because today we've got a great topic and it's about stress, the impact of stress on the body. We talk a lot about the impact of stress on the mind, but today we want to talk about how it affects your body. And we have a fabulous expert. Her name is Dr. Vivian Brown. She's a family physician in Toronto and is the vice president for Medicis Health Group. She's in charge of the medical affairs. So Dr. Brown knows about this topic very, very intimately. She teaches medical students, residents, and is highly respected for her work in continuing medical education for family doctors. But also, she talks about menopause and vaccines. So there are so many different topics that we can talk about today. I'm very excited about having Dr. Brown on our show.
Let's get her on the air, Debbie. Dr. Vivian Brown, welcome to The Smart Divorce on Divorce Source Radio.
Thank you.
It's a real pleasure to have you here. You know, Steve and I talk so much about the impact of divorce on an individual's mental state, but I think we really want to address today how it affects us physically. So can you go into that in a lot more detail? You know, we talk about being depressed. So what happens?
And you know what? One thing, if I could just interrupt for a second, because I want to lay a little foundation for this. We didn't get into it too much in the intro, but Deborah suffered some physical issues when she was going through the divorce. She had pains and aches and sciatica, things like that. And for myself, 9 days after this very high conflict divorce that ended in mediation, 9 days after that, Dr. Brown, I lost every hair on my body, alopecia areata universalis. And although my dermatologist said, well, I've seen a lot of people go through divorce and none of them have had this, I personally believe, and I know Deborah believes, that our situations definitely had a stress component involved. What do you think?
Well, it's a really good question, Steve, because I think that we in the medical world truly believe that stress has an impact on your immune system. It's different for different people, and realistically, not everybody is as prone to various physical ailments as others are. But if you look in large populations, we know that there is a measurable impact of stress on your immune system. And then what happens after that depends on the individual person. There's been some studies, for example, looking at depression and immunity and how people respond to vaccine, where you can measure that people have a better response to vaccine if they're not depressed. And if they are depressed, they have less of an immune response to the same vaccine. So whether we're talking about the stress of divorce or the stress of a death, we know that stress has a huge impact.
Absolutely. And we know where we speak. And I also think that perhaps it's almost like an accident waiting to happen. So if you have like an underlying condition, then there's a trigger then that brings it to the forefront. Would you agree?
I think that's true because realistically we know that some people are more vulnerable than others. And I would look at divorce as being this window of vulnerability.
Yeah.
For those of us that are vulnerable, the divorce, the stress of the divorce, the change in immune status, they let that vulnerability come through. And for some people, it's hair loss, as you discussed, Steve. For other people, it may be ulcers. For other people, it may be high blood pressure. Somebody else, it may be, changes in their hormone function. So women may stop getting periods or have their thyroid underperform or be inactive. So it's different because not everybody is vulnerable in the same way. But I think we have a window of vulnerability around divorce, and that's what you really want to combat against.
So when you talk about
for that.
Sorry, when you talk about window of vulnerability, now, I've got a few friends that are family law lawyers, and they have told me that they have clients that all of a sudden have began to suffer from cancer. They feel that the cancer occurred. It could have been underlying, but do you think that the stress was a trigger to the cancer?
I don't think anybody would come and say that stress causes a cancer. But if we think about it suppressing your immune system, and your immune system is the vigilantes that are keeping everything in place, then certainly stress will affect your immune function, and therefore your immune system may not be able to suppress the cancer that was lurking or that you were at risk for. There's just a very interesting study that was done years ago. Women in chemotherapy for breast cancer, when they started to care about their appearance, they started to put on lipstick, they started to respond better to chemotherapy. Now, it wasn't the physical act of putting on lipstick. It was the caring about yourself once again. It was the being in touch with how you felt and having that more positive outlook that seemed to affect their response to chemotherapy. So I think we know that stress affects many different things, and there's been many studies that suggest this. What we really need to look at in the process of a divorce is how you handle that stress and whether or not you're guarding against that stress so that you don't leave yourself fragile and vulnerable to lurking illness.
So let's talk about something here. When you are fragile and you're depressed and you're sad and you don't, oftentimes people don't make enough time for what's really important to help them get through this. For instance, I'm so tired. I don't feel good. I'm not going to work out today. Or, I'm not going to make that extra effort to eat healthfully. Like, what would you tell people?
Yeah. Well, Deborah, I think that's really important because what someone's really saying when they say, I have no time, or they say, I don't feel like it, what they're really saying is, it's not my priority. And it doesn't, you can't be your priority 24 hours a day. But if you don't have yourself as a priority for at least some of the day, then you are putting yourself and eventually your family at risk. So I think one of the answers is to say, when am I the priority? And I need to be the priority at least for some of the time so that I can take care of myself, so that I'll be well and healthy to take care of the things that I care about. And I like to use the example of the flight attendants on the plane. When they tell you the oxygen comes down, you put it on yourself first, and then you put it on the child sitting beside you. It's a really good analogy. If you don't take care of yourself, you won't be well to take care of the person sitting beside you, the child, the whoever. So it's not being selfish to take care of yourself. It's actually being selfless because you're making yourself the priority for part of the time.
Part of the problem with that, though, is when people are going through the divorce process, they can be naturally depressed. And if you're depressed, then it's really hard to care about yourself or anything else for that matter.
Well, I think that's true, and I think that's where professional help is sometimes appropriate, or having a partner to do certain things with. When you're doing a walking program at 6:30 in the morning, makes a difference if there's 3 people waiting for you or if you do this by yourself. So I think it's a time when you want to access the people in your world that are supportive to you, or the health professional that can be supportive to you, so that you have a plan in place. At the company that I work for, at Medicist Health Group, one of the things we talk about is aggressive prevention. This is the time when we want to be aggressive about prevention, because no matter how poorly you're feeling emotionally, if you get physically ill and are feeling unwell, that will make things worse. And so this is a time to really focus on prevention, on the modifiable risk factors that you have control over. You have control over what you eat. You have control over whether you do exercise today or tomorrow or the next day. You have control over how much alcohol you consume or whether you smoke or you don't smoke. You may not have control over everything. You certainly don't have control over your partner or ex-partner as you thought you did, but you definitely have control over some of the modifiable risk factors, and that's where I think we need to put some energy.
I think that's really important that you make an excellent point, and I think that's why it's critical then to start an exercise program. As you had mentioned previously, that when you are so stressed, the importance of taking care of yourself and having a positive outlook.
Yes, and I think, Deborah, when you exercise, even doing a small amount of exercise, it's a benefit for your heart. It's a benefit for your lung capacity. It's a benefit in terms of weight. And when you start to feel a little more energetic, it's such a boost to your morale. So when you look at people who are very stressed, but they also are very physically fit, they tend to handle that stress much better.
Dr. Brown, You mentioned hormones, and I'm wondering what the role in the process of stress they play. Is it that when you're under stress, your hormones aren't functioning as well, and then your hormones are the protective source in the first place? Is that what's happening, the breakdown of that through stress, or is something else going on?
Well, let's just remember how adrenaline works in the body. Adrenaline is that hormone that gets stimulated when you're, in a risky situation, that fight or flight response, where your hormones get kicked in and your heart rate goes up and you're ready for battle. That's an acute response, and that's protective of the body, right? This kid is running across the road, your hormones kick in, your adrenaline kicks in, you can run and grab that child. And that's a positive response of a hormone stimulation. But when you've got chronic stress and that hormone is elevated endlessly, there ends up being a sort of a negative impact. And so all of those hormonal fluctuations that are designed to help you in a short-term situation become negative in a long-term situation. So, for example, you put out too much glucose in your system, your sugar goes too high. And that's because in the short run, your body needs sugar right away, and your body's designed to do that. In the long run, chronic stress, chronic elevated hormones, chronically elevated adrenaline, it's releasing too much sugar. And so we start to see the changes with chronic stress, which are actually negative. So hormones are a two-edged sword. They're a benefit in the short run, and that's how the body is designed. But there is a risk in the long run if it becomes a chronically stimulated system, which is why we all need that downtime. We need to do something like yoga or Pilates and have that relaxation phase where we allow our bodies to relax physically as well as emotionally and have those naturally elevated levels reduce themselves.
Well, if you're having these stress issues, would you recommend going to a doctor and having your cortisol levels checked?
I don't know that that's all that helpful because cortisol changes every minute as the day goes on. It's like taking a snapshot and saying, what do you look like this minute, and are you going to look the same way in an hour? And the answer is no, those levels fluctuate. I do think it's important to see your healthcare practitioner if you've had some hormonal changes that are reflective in, for example, in a woman, a missed period or unexpected weight gain, where you may want to get things like your thyroid checked and your FSH and LH levels, the levels that stimulate ovulation, you want to get those checked. Because we know with acute stress, those levels often turn off, and so women will stop ovulating and start missing periods, and then often women are worried, could they be pregnant? And the reality is they're not pregnant, they're not ovulating normally because stress is too high.
And for men, when they're under stress, their testosterone drops drastically.
Exactly, and that fluctuates depending on the time that you take it and some of the other drugs that people may be on and some of the other concerns that they have. So I think looking at hormone levels is important if you're having specific symptoms. It's not something I would do routinely in everybody all the time.
What about vaccines? Like, Steve and I were just talking earlier, and we had talked also about, for instance, the shingles vaccine, because 1 out of 2 adults tend to get shingles. So would this be a really good time to get it?
What we know is one of the number one changes to your immune system is just aging itself. And aging is a stress on the system. And some of the diseases that we are able to suppress, and the term is sequester, but really park away. Our immune system does that well when we're young, and with changes in age doesn't do it as well. Shingles is actually the chickenpox virus that most of us have had since we're children that has been parked away or sequestered in part of the spinal cord. And we don't get into trouble with shingles till we're older, till our immune system gets weaker, or, as we're discussing, till we're under great stress. And when we're under great stress, our immune system doesn't work as well, and that chickenpox virus leaves where it's parked away, leaves where it's sequestered, and comes to the surface and causes shingles. So absolutely, this is an important time to look at your immunity and do what you can to increase your immune system, to boost your immunity. And that's what I mean when we talk about aggressive prevention. The shingle shot in Canada is recommended for people over the age of 50, and this is a really important time to get immunized and increase your immune system so that you are less at risk for a clear disease that's related to aging and stress.
But the shingles...
There's other vaccines on the market that would be important as well, but I think shingles is a particularly good example because it's so closely tied to immune response.
And shingles is a herpes virus, if I'm understanding this correctly.
It's a varicella virus. It's a varicella virus, so it's in the same family as chickenpox and herpes. They're all in the same family. They're cousins. And in North America, most adults have had chickenpox, so they're not going to get a case of chickenpox when that virus gets loose in their system. They get a case of shingles. It basically erupts in a single dermatome or in a single nerve, so that's why you see it in a very demarcated place on the skin. And for some of us, getting shingles is mild. It's just a rash that comes and goes, a few blisters. But about 20% of people will get chronic nerve pain in that area supplied to the skin. That's called post-herpetic neuralgia, and that can be absolutely excruciating pain for months to years. So it can be a significant impairment to an average person.
Yeah, my uncle had it. It lasted for a long time. Will Valtrex help with shingles?
It does, but only if you take it within the first 24 to 48 hours. Once you've passed 72 hours, it doesn't work as well. And the problem is a lot of people will have discomfort before the rash. So once the rash actually breaks out, they've already had it in their system for a day or two. So the antiviral medication, and there's a couple of different ones on the market, are certainly better than nothing, but they don't reduce the risk significantly of post-herpetic neuralgia in a severe case. The older you are, the more likely you are to get post-herpetic neuralgia, and the more severe the initial presentation. So if you have a bad rash with a lot of pain, that's the person that's going to get the chronic pain. Now, they did a study that was really interesting. They had people doing Tai Chi, and they then monitored their response to the shingles virus. And those people that were doing Tai Chi on a regular basis did better, they were immunized, than those people who weren't.
Wow.
And so once again, we see that in general, doing healthful things for your body improves your immune response. That's just one example. The Tai Chi, the immune response to the herpes, to the shingles vaccine. But you can see that if we look at other things that we can do to take care of our body, and then we have a way of measuring them, we know that there is a difference when we're relaxed and healthful and doing healthy things in a normal person.
Right. So I know that you've said nothing makes you feel more fragile than getting sick. Absolutely. So we really want to live a healthy life. What about vitamins and supplements? What do you suggest that people take? Is there anything that they should step up in terms of, especially when they're going through such a stressful time in their life?
Well, I think for most of us in North America, and I'm talking about adults, we need to be on vitamin D. And vitamin D is really important because it decreases risk of osteoporosis. There's some evidence that it decreases your risk of colon cancer. And typically you get vitamin D from sunlight, but the angle of the sun on North America doesn't let you absorb vitamin D very well. Plus, when you're out in the sun, we're telling you to put on sunblock, and it blocks out the vitamin D absorption. So I think vitamin D is probably my number one choice.
And you would recommend that in the liquid form, D3, correct?
There's various forms on the market, and I think that overall you need something that you're going to absorb, and there are different brands and different companies making vitamin D, so I think you can speak to the pharmacist about what would be best for an individual. But generally the recommendation is somewhere between 1,000 to 2,000 international units a day. The other thing that's really interesting is looking at omega-3 and how that is having an effect on the immune system. And we know we get omega vitamins from fish and from healthy eating, but not everybody eats healthy. And we do think that there is a benefit from taking omega-3. That's for your immune system. It seems to have an anti-inflammatory effect. So for those aches and pains and stiffness, that may be a benefit. I think in general, the multivitamin is important, but I don't want to leave the audience with the impression that you can replace healthy eating by a handful of vitamins, because I don't think one replaces the other. I think one can augment the other. So I do think it's important in terms of antioxidants to be eating those fruits and vegetables and the broccoli, the blueberries, all the things that you've read about. I don't think you can get away with eating on the run all the time and just, dumping some vitamins in your system and hoping it'll combat the other problems.
Good point. I want to ask you a question, and that's about sex. People do want to know about sex, especially when you're getting into other relationships, and when you were married to the same partner, sleeping with the same partner for years, you feel like that's safe sex. But all of a sudden, you're in the dating market, you're with other people, and for those that maybe there is no risk of getting pregnant, they think, well, either a guy's had his tubes tied. So a woman's had her tubes tied, a guy has had his vasectomy. So they think that perhaps they don't need to necessarily practice safe sex. But isn't that wrong?
Well, first of all, Deborah, I would say that maybe they weren't in such a safe relationship to begin with, if the situation is now one of divorcing. And so I think that, we have preconceived notions, and that may be not true for everyone. As people are now single again and looking for a new relationship, I think it's important that both men and women consider themselves, consider this an option for their future. Some people are so down and so depressed and feel so rejected as a divorce is proceeding that they think they never will be involved with a partner again. And I'm very clear to tell the people I see that that is very unlikely true, and that most people are able to be in another relationship. And I would say let's get prepared as opposed to thinking it's never going to happen again. And so I think it's important that we think about sexually transmitted infection, and it's important to think about HPV vaccine. It's important to think about hepatitis B, which are two things we can vaccinate for that people are going to be exposed to when they're with another partner. And I think it's important that we talk about things like erectile dysfunction, things like vaginal atrophy, as we're looking at an age group that may be slightly older and getting into some of these issues, which are all compounded by stress and anxiety.
Now, that's interesting that you talk about the HPV virus and that HPV vaccine. If you're 40 or 50s, or even in your 60s, are you saying that you could still protect yourself against HPV?
Well, in the latest studies, this study is now saying in Canada that you can be vaccinated until age 45, and we have good evidence for that, and that there's no danger in vaccinating people as they are older. There's just not as good studies in terms of their immune response, because like everything else, when you vaccinate older people, their immune system doesn't respond as well. So certainly in my practice, I am suggesting that women be vaccinated in their 40s into their 50s, and depending on their relationships, even older than that, because you're never too old to have acquired HPV, and if we can boost your immune system, it may not be that 100% response that we see in 15-year-olds, but let's say an 85% response in someone 45 to 50 is certainly better than no response.
I think that's an excellent point.
I think there's an advantage to protecting yourself where you can, and so HPV vaccine is now approved in Canada from age 9 to 45, and there is a recommendation that if you're older than 45, it's between you and your physician to discuss your particular case. When we look at hepatitis B is very infectious. Now, most young people have been immunized through the school system for hepatitis B, but hepatitis B is picked up through body fluids. So when you see someone who's been married for 25 years, didn't get this in the school system, didn't get vaccinated in the school system, and is now suddenly single again, we want to protect them from hepatitis B as well, which is a very contagious virus. So I think there's a lot to do to be proactive about your health. There's a lot that we can offer. And realistically, I think by looking at the modifiable risks, we can't change how old you are, and we can't really change what's gone on in your marriage, but we can definitely have you feel more stronger, healthier, more able to cope with the changes that are coming.
I think that's great advice. Let me ask you one more question in terms of, being perimenopausal or menopausal for women. There are changes, obviously, in the nether regions in your vagina. And I think that women, there are some women, because I've heard, various conversations, saying they're so afraid to get into another relationship because of the changes, of the dryness, of the sex hurts. They're afraid to have that conversation with a man. But, it is not necessarily preventable, but there's definitely things that you can do to overcome some of the issues.
Absolutely, and I have the honor of being the incoming chairperson of the Consumer Education Committee for the North American Menopause Society, and if I can mention that the website, which is www.menopause.org, is probably the number one website in North America for anything to do with menopause. And there are so many options so that women can be comfortable when they're ready to be sexually active. There's vaginal hormones, which are considered extremely safe. They're basically poorly absorbed into the system. They only work vaginally. For that reason, they're very safe to use. And I think that number one, the most important thing is to be able to have the conversation, both with your primary care provider, but also with your partner. Sex should not be painful, and it doesn't have to be just because you are getting older. And we're now seeing women, and I'll use the example of someone like Susan Sarandon, who's 65. Now, that's not the image we had when our grandmothers were 65, but certainly we're seeing sexually vibrant women into their 60s, into their 70s, and I would even say into their 80s. And so we want women to be comfortable, and there are lots of choices depending on what the issue is. I think the most important thing is for women not to be shy about talking about changes with both their healthcare providers and with their new partners. I think there's a certain intimacy in sharing how things are going, and much better than being in pain, being uncomfortable, and having your partner feel that you're rejecting him, that you're not interested when really is you're afraid of what's going to happen.
Do you think there's a shift?
It's back to that good communication.
Yeah. Do you think there's a shift? Are people becoming more open about their issues, their personal issues?
I don't know if they're becoming more open. I'm sort of not, I don't know how I would measure that, but I certainly think the public is more educated. And I think partly because of the internet and partly because of the medical sites on the internet, certainly the public is more educated. I think my role as a physician is often to give people we would consider credible websites, accurate websites that are giving you pros and cons of various choices, and not just a star or a popular magazine or a popular book that happens to have Hollywood written all over it. I think people need to go to credible medical websites to get information. So I'm not sure that people are more open, but they absolutely are more educated.
Well, and there's a lot more education going on about hormone replacement therapy now, so that a lot of women are taking the estrogen patch, and some of the men are taking the testosterone creams, things like that. Are you proponents of that? And a lot of doctors that I've spoken to that are not proponents of it, they're still buying into the Women's Health Initiative that was performed back in the 50s. And more of the anti-aging experts dismissed that report because that it was done with synthetic hormones. It was the Prempro, the horses, the mare's urine.
Steve, it's a complex issue, and the Women's Health Initiative was actually published in 2002, so about 10 years ago. But the reality is I think where we've come to today is that we really have to personalize medicine and individualize the answer. So it's not that someone could be pro-hormone or anti-hormone. It's different for different people. If I have a 50-year-old woman who's healthy, who's a non-smoker, who's going through menopause, has lots of symptoms, I absolutely would use hormones. On the other hand, if I have someone who's 70, who's got all kinds of heart disease, diabetes, who was a smoker for 30 years, even though she quit a few years ago, and is looking for a quick fix, hormones are not the answer. So I think it depends on what the question is, and in this case, it depends on the individual. In general, I think hormones are appropriate for a lot of the patients that I see, but we spend a lot of time talking about the potential issues around health that people do have control over. I like to use smoking because it's such an obvious issue. For those people that smoke, they are putting themselves at greater risk. It means they're greater risk on many different levels. And when we look at divorce and we look at stress and you find people smoking and drinking more, they're actually doing themselves great harm. So is the answer right for one drug for everybody? No, it isn't. You have to look at the individual. But people have to take responsibility for the choices that they make.
Are you learning more about increased estrogen levels in men? It seems that some of the new focus is towards that in terms of cardiovascular care, that as the males age, their estrogen levels rise, and that becomes problematic.
It does, and that has to do partly with liver function. Estrogen is partly metabolized in the liver, has to do with alcohol intake, has to do with what other drugs they're on. And so we're seeing sort of more subtle changes that we're watching as physicians. And again, it's different for different people.
Mm-hmm. And,
the other issue is when we look at the ideal person is slim, is fit, is a non-smoker, is drinking moderately, which is for women is 7 to 9 drinks per week, not more than that. This ideal person is much more able to handle the physical changes that stress brings on than a person who's hit that age and is now being assaulted by stresses, but at the same time was also overweight, not worked out, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, trying to do too much in a day and not taking care of themselves over the last 10 years. When you look at those two individuals, they may be the same age, but they're going to respond very differently to added stress. And that's why I would go back to what our mothers have always said to us, which is eating properly, sleeping properly. That's a really big issue. Taking care of yourself, doing exercise on a regular basis. It lets you be prepared for the onslaught of stress and anxiety around divorce.
And beyond,
I think that's a great point.
And beyond the stress and anxiety, Deborah, are the environmental toxins today that we're dealing with. through the plastics. And I mean, they're finally getting hip to that within the manufacturing industry to try to get rid of some of the bisphenol. But environmental toxins definitely play a role in this, don't they, Dr. Brown?
I'm not an expert in that, but in general, we're going back to basics. It's almost like my answer to the question about vitamins. We're going back to healthy eating, going back to good choices, going back to less processed foods, less chemically modified foods, things that are basically more wholesome and more healthy. And I think that only makes good sense for us and for our children.
I think that's a great point. What about your patients that tend to self-medicate? You know, either they drink too much now, they're going through the stress, or they're smoking more, eating more. Is that when you would send them to a mental health professional?
It's certainly when I'll bring up the conversation. You know, I mean, people have to be ready to make changes. You can't impose changes on people. And what I do encourage them is to see their primary care practitioner, come to a facility like ours at Medicus, you know, make the decision as to how they're going to proceed, because staying on the same track, on the same course that they're on now, is just a slippery slope downward. So sometimes for a lot of people, they just need it pointed out to them, and sometimes with a health professional that perhaps they've been with for years and they trust, they can listen to the information that may not be very comforting. You know, when we tell people that you're just not doing as well as you should, that's not what they wanted to hear. They wanted to hear that everything's okay. And I think we have to be honest with patients and honest with the clients that we're seeing. It's not okay. It's not always okay. But the time to do something is now, not after an event.
When someone is spiraling, they're spiraling down, do they necessarily see it, or do you have to really point it out to them? So for our listeners that have a friend that's really not living this healthy lifestyle, that's got all these vices, do they see it? Do you advise them that they should, I guess, send their friend to their mental health, their health practitioner?
Well, I think you have to be a friend. And, you know, a friend doesn't tell you look great in something if you don't. A friend tells you how it's happening. And if you are drinking too much, and even worse, driving when you're drinking too much, or when you've had too much to drink, or not taking care of yourself, or letting certain things slip, a really good friend would help you come to your healthcare practitioner or a counselor or a social worker or whoever it is that is giving you support. Even your lawyer may do that. But I think if you're a good friend, then you have to be a good friend when things are not easy, not just when things are fine.
Interesting to me how your friend will direct you to a doctor when you have a chemical problem. But we can look at our friends all day long, many of them who are obese, and we never say anything about that. We dare not say anything about that. And you know, as a physician, people come to you that are obese, and you let them know, man, you are really risking your health. But for whatever reason, they just don't want to follow along, do they?
Well, as I said, people have to be ready for change. And, you know, I think the statistic is in getting people to quit smoking, physicians have to bring it up at least 7 times at 7 different interviews. But if you don't bring it up, then there's no hope whatsoever. And so I sometimes have said to my patients that I think they're in the wrong place, that they keep coming to me and hearing the same things. And if they can't hear what I'm saying, then maybe they need to see somebody else. That's a very powerful thing to say to somebody, because they immediately take much more notice about what you're telling them, even though it's not what they want to hear.
Wow.
So I think that we have to acknowledge that change doesn't happen quickly. People didn't get to be 100 pounds overweight in, you know, a couple of months. It was a lifetime of poor choices and different kinds of eating. But I think we can't give up on people. We have to be able to have that discussion and figure out why someone is not motivated to make a change and help them get that motivation.
Right. And I would think, I mean, obviously the same applies to alcohol and substance abuse. It doesn't just happen overnight. This is something that people have been doing for a long time. You've either been drinking too much for quite a while, you've been taking too many drugs. But I really like your perspective on the health promotion and health prevention. I mean, definitely you are in control and you have choices, and people can make good choices or they can choose to make not so great choices.
And I think, Deborah, that can be very empowering when someone feels that this divorce or the end of what they thought was their relationship is sort of happening to them. They have no control over the other person. They have no control over the process, and they may just be feeling overwhelmed that this is being thrust upon them. It's an important reminder that they do have control over some things in their life, and there's nothing that's going to make them feel better than if they feel strong, healthy, slim, and in control of themselves as a person. Their partner, their ex-partner, will not be happy to see that.
How true.
That's a great parting note. I think that is such valuable information for people to hear. So, dear listeners, if we have embarked on bad habits, I think now is a time to start changing and listen to Dr. Brown. You've got choices, and there are modifiable risks and preventable risks, and start living that healthy lifestyle.
And I think that that's overall really good advice for people that are stressed in the middle of divorce or struggling with the marriage that they're trying to work out. Stress comes in different ways, and I think you handle it much better when you're handling your physical health much better.
Thank you so much for this. It's been very educational. I've really learned a lot today. It's been great.
Thank you.
Now, that was really informative. I really learned a lot today.
I liked her approach, too. She was open to different treatments for different people.
Yeah, it's like a holistic approach too, and it's true, nothing makes you feel more fragile than getting sick. And that's the time where you really need to focus on good health habits. And it's the time where you are less likely to focus on that.
Right.
Don't make those excuses for bad health habits, because it's within your grasp to change it. Because at the end of the day, if you end up eating too much, I talk about that all the time. Mm-hmm. If you end up drinking too much, and I'm not saying that I drink, because really I don't. But, if you end up using these bad habits to self-medicate, at the end of the day, you're paying the price, a month down the line, 2 months down the line, when all is said and done. You've got your separation agreement, whatever it is, and now what? Now you've just, gained 10 pounds, you've all of a sudden become a chain smoker, you found that you're drinking now, 2 glasses of wine when you should have just not have drank, every single night, whatever that habit is. You're not sleeping well, and all of these things. Maybe you're drinking too much coffee now, and you're not sleeping at night. And that's something we should have gotten into, actually, because I do find that during a stressful period in many people's lives, they don't sleep well. Right. And Dr. Brown did mention that you need to pay attention to good sleep habits.
Another point that stuck out to me is we're talking about stress when you're going through a divorce. All right, stress when you're going through divorce in and of itself is difficult. But then you add the stressors of other habits such as smoking, being overweight, drinking, and now you're just a snowball of problems waiting to happen.
Well, yeah, and so there are many people, I've got some clients that are now suffering from certain bad choices because of the unhealthy lifestyle that they've been living.
And you always say that divorce is an opportunity, go ahead,
to learn and grow
from. And that's what this is. And I liked when Dr. Brown said at the end, use this time to drop some pounds, to get in health.
And you know what? And she also said, focus on yourself. And I think that is critical. Oftentimes I find that parents sometimes, they have this martyr complex. They've got to do everything for their kids without focusing on themselves. And by not taking any time out for yourself, you become run down. Well, then who's going to take care of your kids? So I do believe, I like what she said, take Pilates, you got the yoga, the Tai Chi, you've got to do something to help balance you. And on that note, Steve, I think that I am going to go out now and have a little run. We want to hear how you're managing your stress and how you are going to make that commitment to get healthy too.
Most definitely. And if you want to write us, you can do that at divorcesourceradio@gmail.com or info@thesmartdivorce.com. Is that right? Info@thesmartdivorce.com.
It is. It is.
Wow. Scared myself for a minute there. I've only been saying this for, a year and a half now?
Exactly. You did it right.
Thank you. All right, Deborah, thanks. Another great show. I look forward to speaking to you next week. As always, I hope the program helped you. If you have a comment or question you'd like to ask us, we'd love to hear from you. You can leave us a voicemail on our listener line at area code 248-686-2256. Or drop us an email with your question or comment to divorcesourceradio@gmail.com. New programs are available every week on divorcesourceradio.com, as well as iTunes, BlackBerry, Stitcher, and all over the web. If you'd like to be notified when new programs are available, you can follow us on Twitter. Our follow word is Divorce Source. Also, if you're not listening from our website, I invite you to stop by divorcesourceradio.com, where you'll find a complete program archive. If you're looking for a specific subject, simply type it into our search engine, and chances are you'll find what you're looking for. We also have other resources available at our website as well. And while you're on our website, click on the Facebook icon and join the growing Divorce Source Radio Facebook community. Thanks for listening. Until next time, make it a great week and stay healthy. I'm Steve Peck.